By midnight on a Thursday in February, Marco Fiore had lost everything. His keys to the Caruso compound, his seat at the Inner Council, his name, spoken with weight for 11 years across 3 wards of Chicago, reduced to a cautionary detail that Damian Caruso would deliver quietly, methodically, and without a single moment of regret. Marco stood in a parking garage on the south side of the city, 2 men from Damian's personal detail flanking him, and understood, too late, as men like him always do, that the woman he had tried to erase had just erased him. But this story doesn't begin in that parking garage. It begins 6 weeks earlier, in a quarterly review that ended with 9 hands raised against 1 woman, and a man at the head of the table who had not yet decided what he was going to do about it. Her name was Valentina Rossi. She was 34, a forensic accountant with a master's from DePaul University and 7 years of experience untangling the financial architecture of organizations that officially did not exist. She was a full-figured woman, broad through the shoulders and hips, the kind of physical presence that entered a room before she did. And she had learned early in her career to let her work precede her, to arrive quietly and let what she produced do the louder talking. She had come to work for the Caruso organization 2 years earlier, and in those 2 years she had rebuilt the organization's financial monitoring systems from the ground up, closed 4 exposure points that had been bleeding money for years, and saved amounts that even the men who resented her presence had stopped pretending were not significant. Marco Fiore had resented her most of all. Marco was Damian's underboss, second in command. 12 years in the organization, the kind of man who had confused longevity with authority for so long that he had stopped being able to tell the difference. He was also a man who believed, without ever having examined the belief, that a woman like Valentina did not belong in rooms where real decisions were made, not because she was incompetent. The problem was the opposite. Her competence was the problem, specifically because it arrived in a body and a presentation that Marco had categorized as lesser from her first week, and that categorization had become the lens through which he filtered everything she did. What Marco had also been doing for 2 years was skimming, not dramatically, nothing that would trigger the automated alerts Valentina had built into the system. Thin, consistent shavings off specific transactions routed through a subsidiary structure he had established long before she arrived, the kind of theft that takes years to find if nobody is specifically looking for it. Valentina had been specifically looking for it for 6 months, not because she had reason to suspect Marco initially. She had started because a pattern in one subsidiary's disbursement records didn't reconcile with the corresponding supplier invoices, and Valentina did not leave irreconcilable ledgers alone. Numbers that didn't add up had reasons. Finding the reason was the only part of her job she had never been willing to leave incomplete. The reason she found was Marco, but on the afternoon of the quarterly review, she had not yet found the full scope of it. She was standing at the projection screen, walking the room through her analysis of the subsidiary restructuring. 8 other men present, documents in front of each of them, when Marco made his move. He waited until she had finished. He waited until the room was about to turn to questions. Then he leaned back in his chair, looked at her with the deliberate patience of a man performing disregard, and said, loud enough for everyone in the room to absorb, "I keep thinking about how someone who can't manage her own body is supposed to manage our money." The room went quiet, not the comfortable quiet of agreement, the particular, shameful quiet of men who know what they have just heard and are calculating what it costs them to say so. 2 of them looked at the table. One of them made a sound that began as a laugh and died before it fully arrived. The rest held a stillness that was its own kind of participation. Valentina stood at the projection screen with her hands still resting on the presenter remote. She looked at Marco for 4 full seconds without blinking. "Every dollar I manage is accounted for," she said. "Every single one." Would you like me to demonstrate the methodology? Marco smiled the smile of a man who believes he has already won. I'm sure it's very thorough, he said. Some things just aren't a good fit. She saved her file. She picked up her notepad. She left the conference room with the even, unhurried pace of a woman who does not run from anything, and she did not look back. Behind her, the room produced a few sounds, a cleared throat, a shifted chair, that were not quite the laughter Marco had wanted, and not quite the objection that would have required someone to have courage. Damien Caruso, who had entered the room during the final 15 minutes of the presentation, said nothing. He watched Valentina leave. He watched Marco watch her leave, with the satisfied expression of a man who believes he has just put something back in its place. Damien said nothing, but he filed it. In her research on workplace humiliation, Dr. Linda Hartling of the Jean Baker Miller Training Institute found that public shaming of this kind does more than wound pride. It creates a neurological state functionally similar to physical threat, activating the same stress systems that evolved for survival. What it also does in people with Valentina's particular architecture of self-possession is clarify. Humiliation that doesn't break a person tends to accelerate exactly what the person doing the humiliating was hoping to prevent. What Valentina needed to do was finish finding what she had started finding. Nobody in that room understood yet what Marco Fiore had just set into motion. She found it 3 days later, not just the skimming. That was almost secondary now. What she found, underneath the skimming, underneath the shell subsidiary structure, was the architecture of something larger, by an order of magnitude, separate accounts, parallel supplier relationships, a financial infrastructure that didn't serve the Crusoe organization. It served whoever was planning to replace it. Marco had not been stealing from Damien. He had been funding a takeover. She sat at her screen for a long time after she understood what she was looking at. The rational calculation was simple. Say nothing. Find another position. Let the men with guns sort out the men with guns. She had no obligation beyond her employment contract, which was already, she now realized, being quietly terminated. In the 2 weeks since the quarterly review, her file access had been restricted. Her documentation requests were being routed through Marco's desk for approval, and a dinner she had attended for 18 months had been scheduled without her name. She was being walked out. She just wasn't supposed to know it yet. She sat with the rational calculation for exactly 47 minutes. Then she printed nothing, saved nothing to any recoverable drive, memorized the account numbers and transfer sequences and the offshore structure's name with the precision of someone who had done exactly this before, because she had done this before in 3 years with a financial crimes unit before she burned out on the bureaucracy and tripled her salary going private. She knew that information, this dangerous, did not survive in documents. It survived in the one place nobody could search. She deleted her access logs, closed everything, and began figuring out how to reach Damien without Marco knowing. What happened next took 3 days of careful navigation that she would never describe in full to anyone. What matters is that on a Saturday evening at a restaurant on the near north side, where Damien was having dinner with 2 legitimate business contacts, Valentina sat at the bar and ordered water and waited. When Damien walked past toward the exit, he found a cocktail napkin on the bar with 7 digits on it, a transaction reference number that would only mean something to someone who had already been looking at the subsidiary records. Nobody who watched Valentina leave that bar saw anything different about her. That was exactly the point. Robert Cialdini, in his foundational research on social influence, documented how people who have been publicly dismissed operate with a specific invisibility. The person who dismissed them has stopped watching. Marco had decided Valentina was neutralized, so she wasn't a threat, right up until she was. Damien called through a channel that didn't exist on any phone she officially owned, at 2 in the morning. She recited what she knew. Account numbers, transfer dates, the offshore structure's name, the timeline, 60 days before Marco would have enough to move without needing outside backing. Who else knows this? Damien said. Nobody, she said. "And if I don't make contact with a specific person by 10 tomorrow morning, that changes." He told her to stay visible, do nothing different. What John Gottman identified after 4 decades studying the architecture of human trust as the moment of genuine commitment is not a declaration. It is a demonstration of loyalty under conditions where no return is guaranteed. Valentina had everything to lose by making that call. She had nothing promised in exchange. Damian Caruso, who had not trusted anyone completely in 16 years of running an organization where trust was the primary vulnerability, heard something in the controlled precision of her voice that he had not heard in a very long time. He also heard, underneath the precision, someone who had chosen to make that call not out of self-interest, but out of something more durable and harder to manufacture. He said nothing about what he heard. Men like Damian process what they know through what they do next. The following 12 days were among the harder things Valentina had done. She went to work. She maintained professional patience with the restricted access. She attended a restructuring meeting where Marco spoke about her contributions to the organization in the past tense while she sat 2 seats down from him, took notes, and listened to him present a proposal designed to eliminate the financial oversight system she had built, the exact systems that had found him. She did not look at him differently. She did not look at him at all. What she didn't know was that Damian's people had been inside Marco's parallel financial structure for 9 of those 12 days. That 3 of the 9 men who had voted against her had, when shown the evidence, immediately understood they had been used as instruments in a plan they had never agreed to join. That the meeting Marco had called for the following Tuesday, framed as a final procedural vote on the restructuring, was a room he would not walk out of the same way he walked in. What was about to happen to Marco Fiore was not going to look like anything he had prepared for. The meeting was in a private dining room at a hotel in the Loop. Marco arrived expecting to deliver the final terms of Valentina's removal. He found Damian already seated. He found Valentina seated across from Damian. He found 3 of the men he had considered his closest allies on the council seated against the wall, not at the table. The spatial arrangement alone told most of the story. Marco sat down. His face showed nothing yet. He was still performing the version of himself that held the room. Damian placed a single sheet of paper on the table in front of Marco. 1 page, clean, specific, the numbers arranged with the particular clarity that was Valentina's professional signature. The ability to reduce complex financial architecture to its essential, indisputable facts. She found it 2 weeks ago, Damian said, before you called the vote. This is what Dr. Craig Malkin documented in his research on narcissistic psychology as the mirror trap. The moment when a person so conditioned to controlling the narrative loses the capacity to process information that contradicts it. The trap springs from within. Marco looked at the paper. He looked at Valentina. The first movement across his face was disbelief, the automatic defense of a man confronted with the distance between his self-image as the indispensable one and the evidence that he had been outmaneuvered by the woman he had publicly tried to diminish. Then the disbelief cracked, and what was underneath it was visible to everyone at that table. Ordinary fear, wearing the face of a man who had finally run completely out of room. "I can explain," he started. "You're going to explain it," Damian said. "But not to me." What happened to Marco's financial infrastructure over the following 72 hours was not violent. It didn't need to be. Valentina had designed the mechanisms herself, operating with full authorization from Damian. Accounts frozen. Subsidiary structures collapsed. 11 years of accumulated leverage dissolved through pathways she had mapped in her head during those 47 minutes of sitting with a rational calculation she had decided not to follow. Every dollar Marco had positioned for his move was redirected. Every contact who might have backed him was informed through appropriate channels that backing him had become a losing proposition by a considerable margin. By midnight on Thursday, 2 men from Damian's detail walked Marco Fiore out of the Caruso compound and into the parking garage on the south side of Chicago and laid out the terms of his exit with the clean brevity that characterized everything Damien did: leave the city, maintain silence, keep his health. Marco took the terms. Men like Marco always take the terms when the machinery that made them feel powerful has been taken away, because without it, there is nothing left to stand on. Damien found Valentina the following morning at the coffee shop near her apartment, where she went every day at 7:15, a habit she had never hidden because she had never had reason to. He sat down across from her without asking permission. He ordered coffee. He looked at her the way a man looks at someone when everything he thought he understood about a situation is being quietly rearranged. "You memorized all of it," he said, "every number." "Writing it down would have been dangerous," she said. "You knew that. I've been doing this for a long time." He was quiet for a moment. The coffee arrived. Neither of them touched it immediately. "The council voted to remove you," he said. "I didn't authorize it, but I let it sit too long before I moved." "Yes," she said. One word. Not forgiveness, not condemnation, just the acknowledgement of someone who had long since stopped needing apologies before deciding how to proceed. "That doesn't happen again," he said, a statement of fact rather than a promise, because in his world, the difference between those two things was everything. What attachment researchers describe as earned security, a concept developed by Dr. Mary Main at the University of California from Bowlby's foundational attachment theory, is the specific form of trust that builds not from a history of safe relationships, but from the observable behavior of one person toward another under real conditions. Not declared, not promised, demonstrated, under pressure, with no guarantee of return. Damien had watched Valentina for 2 years. Her work, her methods, her precision under conditions designed to undermine her. He had watched her, over the last 2 weeks, risk her safety to warn him, execute a critical information transfer without documentation, and sit in a room with the man who had tried to end her career and give him absolutely nothing. He did not catalog this out loud. He simply stopped doubting. "I want to restructure the financial oversight position," he said. "More authority, full access to all accounts, reporting directly to me." Valentina looked at him across the table. "That's a significant offer," she said. "It's an accurate offer," he said. "You were already doing the job. I'm adjusting to the reality." She considered it for exactly as long as it deserved. Then she picked up her coffee. "I'll need full written authorization on the subsidiary documentation," she said. "By Monday." "You'll have it," he said. They sat for another 40 minutes, talking about the restructuring, about 3 exposure points in the legitimate holdings she hadn't yet had authority to address, about what the dismantling of Marco's structure had left visible in the accounts. At no point did either of them say anything that wasn't directly practical. At no point did either of them need to. The 9 men who had raised their hands against Valentina Rossi understood quickly and without being told explicitly that something structural had shifted in the world they operated in. 7 of them were intelligent enough to recognize they had been used as instruments in a plan they had never agreed to join. 2 were too stubborn to admit it. Those 2 found over the following weeks that their access to certain conversations had quietly narrowed. Nobody called a vote without Damien's knowledge again. And Valentina Rossi came to work Monday morning with full written authorization, a direct line to the one person in the organization whose judgment she had decided was worth working inside of, and the particular, clean satisfaction of a person who had been systematically underestimated, and had made that underestimation cost exactly what it deserved to cost. The most durable loyalty is never declared. It's proven at personal risk when the outcome wasn't guaranteed. If this story stayed with you, a like tells me these are worth telling. Subscribe for the next one, because the women in these stories don't wait to be rescued. They just make sure there's nothing left to rescue them from.